and welcome to the SquaMates podcast. This is a very serious podcast about reptiles and amphibians, and I am one of your four co-hosts. My name is Dr. Mark B. Scherz. I'm the curator for herpetology at the Natural History Museum of Denmark, and I'm joined today by just two of my three co-hosts. Unfortunately, Dr. Miralles is not available today, but we are joined today by Ethan Kosak.
Hi, I'm Ethan Kosak. I am an artist and curator of my house full of animals.
And Gabriel Lughetto.
And I'm Gabriel Lughetto, and I'm a paleo artist, scientific illustrator, concept artist, and I used to work in herpetology, but not anymore.
Awesome. Wow, we are so oiled as a machine. Just to give a very brief update on kind of where we are and how things are going for us, at least the three of us that are here today. In the last episode, which has actually aired today when we're recording this, today is the 7th of May. So if you tune into that one over on YouTube or tuned into that, you'll have heard that I talked about that I was going to have my promotion thing to associate professor, and I am now a month and a half after that because it took me forever to edit up the episode. The holidays and whatnot got in the way, but yeah, so now I'm officially associate professor. I got my first salary as associate professor at the university. Thank you very much, which is really exciting. And I mentioned in the past thing that basically all it changes is how I'm allowed to supervise students, and I'm allowed to apply for a lot more money now than I was before. Not in terms of the amount of money, but just there are more grants open to me as an associate professor than there were before, especially fieldwork grants, which is very important. It's so funny to me that like junior faculty here are not allowed to apply for fieldwork grants. You have to have somebody more senior than you. I've been doing fieldwork since I was in a bachelor degree. Like, come on. So weird. Anyway, yeah, so that's the big news from my side. Actually, I don't know if I ever mentioned it before, but we also had a new species of gecko described. Did I mention that previously on the podcast?
I don't think so.
No,
Yeah,
I don't think so.
If not, we described the new species of velvet gecko called Blaesodactylus ganzhorni, named after your Ganzhorn, a famous lemur biologist from Germany. And so it's from western Madagascar. It's a Blaesodactylus. These are velvet geckos. They used to be in the same genus as Haemophilus. And both Haemophilus and Blaesodactylus are known for the fact that they bite like a motherfucker. They have very soft skin. And
they're big, too.
They're pretty big geckos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a gorgeous big gecko, pretty widespread in western Madagascar. And in fact, the first time that I caught one of these geckos was when I was in Madagascar in 2005 at the age of 14 or something, out in Karindi in western Madagascar. So I have very specific memories of this gecko in particular,
Nice.
which is kind of cool. So yeah, that's the news from my side.
I've never kept them, but I have seen them on the hobbyist.
Blaesodactylus, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well,
Haemophilus. Yeah, I would have
Haemophilus,
imagined.
yeah.
So Haemophilus, for those who are not in the know, are from mainland Africa. So Blaesodactylus is the Malagasy representative, and I believe it's actually sister to Geckolepus. And so, like Geckolepus, fishtail geckos have gone a little bit crazy with their, with their anatomy. And Blaesodactylus is much more similar to the sister to that cluster, which is Haemophilus from mainland Africa.
Cool.
But yeah,
Very
lychees have a reputation for being very bitey animals, as do tokes, of course. And I would say, Blaesodactylus Haemophilus are geckos I would not want to be bitten by. They are very strong-jawed, big-head lizards.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Are they fast too? I always got the impression that they were fairly.
They are. They're not the fastest of the geckos. Compared to Hemidactylus, for instance, Hemidactylus is much faster. But I would say that they're considering their bulk, they are appropriately skittish and quick.
Because I was going to say, I have lychees, and lychees are not fast.
No.
But
No. Blaesodactylus are pretty quick, and I would say they're also they're these geckos that are so funny because they're nocturnal. But you almost always see them during the day because they sit in, you see them at night as well, but during the day, you often see them sitting and sunning themselves just beside where they would if they're going to retreat into. So they're kind of what's the word, cathemeral, where they're kind of like kind of active during the day as well, but mostly for the sunning purpose. And then they're quite active at night as well. So yeah, you often will see them in like the crook of trees and stuff. So we also published a bigger like overview. I got the feedback actually when I circulated this paper around at my institution. Somebody wrote to me, was like, "I love to see a paper that's as well illustrated as this one is," and that's like not in terms of the quality of the quality of the illustrations is pretty high as well. We got all of them nicely isolated on white backgrounds and everything. But in addition to that, there are just a lot of illustrations in this paper. So a lot of pictures in there. So it's just pleasant to kind of peruse as well. And I believe it was published open access. There will be a link in the show notes. So you can go and find those over at SquaMatesPod.com.
Awesome.
But yeah, Ethan, how's everything on your end and in the newsroom?
Everything is good. It's spring, so we got lots of laying of eggs. And what's breeding? Palmates are breeding, marbleds are breeding. Axolotls are always breeding, and I'm still working on the book. That's forever. And then we did our based on the Skinktober drawings. I did a Skinks zine.
If you go watch the show on YouTube, you can see Ethan is holding up a copy of the Skinks zine, which is a cute little square format book. I love it.
And I'll have we can link to it. I have it on my shop. So
also there. Yeah, super cool. I've been I wanted to ask you actually, you said you usually go out for the marbled salamander kind of awakening. Spotted salamander awakening in your area. Has that come and been already, or is that kind of ongoing?
Okay, yep. We did that closer to the beginning of April.
Okay.
It's basically it's usually the first rainy night over about 40 degrees up here.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't catch
40 degrees is like 4 or 5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah,
is that right?
40 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually in a protected area. So you go there, we park a ways off and walk because you don't want to, squish anybody. And this year it was, I think we went a little early because it was almost all males. The males come out first.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've been years where there were like 100, just covering the road, and the peepers will be like so loud you have to shout over them. This was not that. We were a little early, but it was still, it was great. That's the closest thing to religion that I have is
It's an amazing thing to observe an emergence like that. I mean,
yes, we have seen them literally coming out of the ground before.
Oh, cool!
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I have pictures of that from a few years back. Yeah,
I mean, true explosive breeding events are just astonishing to behold. I've never had the fortune to be in one, but famously there are these, like in Madagascar, you get Scaphiophryne coming out and they breed like crazy in all the puddles, or Paradoxophyla, which are the weirdest frogs you'll ever see, that come out. They're actually quite similar. I guess from an American perspective, they're very similar to Gastrophryne, so they don't look that special. But in Madagascar, they're super weird, and they're mostly aquatic little microhylids. So they hop up and then they start breeding like crazy in those puddles, and you basically never see them otherwise, which is just so cool. But I've never had the good fortune to be there at the right time. But everybody knows that footage from South America, for instance, with the Agalicnus and other groups that are like explosively breeding.
I was going to say we did see, so even though we were early and we didn't see like a ton of individuals, we actually we saw quite a good number of species.
Oh, cool.
For the area. And we saw, because some years I don't see any of them, Ambystoma jeffersonium, Jeffersonianum.
Jeffersonianum, I think, is actually
Jeffersonianum, right. I always get it wrong.
That's right,
But it was, or it might have been a unisexual variant, but it's with like a light blue
cool
animal. So I'll send you the picture of it and we could post it. But it was really cool. We saw one of those, which that's a rarity there. So
It's this, the springtime is just the best for also here in Northern Europe. I mean, when the newts start coming out of the roads, I basically haven't seen any toads this year so far, which is super weird. But I did find quite a bit of toad spawn and a few mating individuals. And I went for a bike ride with my son to go to an area where I thought there might be some. We found it.
That's the original toad.
Yeah, bufo.
Bufo,
the real thing. The real thing. Originally described by Linnaeus as Rana Bufo, of course.
Of course. We saw a bunch of wood frogs, which used to be Rana sylvaticus.
Yeah,
right?
Rana sylvatica, yeah.
But no, didn't see any American toads. I only heard them, didn't see them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably the most common species I see on Tumblr, actually. Lots of people send me pictures of American toads for identification. And you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, there are some areas where they're really they're easy to confuse with other
oak toads or woodhouse toads.
Yes, woodhouse is the one that most commonly is confusing. Yeah. How about you, Gabriel? How's everything in the South, as we say?
Just, busy as always. I don't know if I talked about it last time, but I'm doing a bunch of illustrations. They're licensing a lot of my illustrations, and I'm doing a lot of new illustrations for a book that is called the Professor Primula's Portfolio of Paleontology. It's a paleontology theme role-playing supplement, and that got just the Kickstarter funded and really well funded because they made
cool.
almost like $300,000 for the project. Wow. And it will that probably comes out I think next year or late this year, and I'm doing a lot of illustrations for them, so that's really cool. I also, for those in the United States, stay tuned to your Science Friday social media channels, because I will be doing something for them pretty soon. Cool. So you will be able to see that there. And other than that, I'm working on a lot of things that I cannot say yet. I really hope that there are three major projects that I think one will come out this year. I think another one I'm not sure, but might come out next year. Mm-hmm. Or this year, but because I don't have control when it comes out. But those two things are I'm really looking forward for people to see them, and a little bit afraid at the same time. And there's also a lot of illustrations that I've done for papers that are about to come out, but I cannot say anything yet. So stay tuned, as always, I say.
Very cool. All right. Well, now that we're all caught up, I think we're going to take a very quick break for a musical interlude, and then we are going to dive into the main topic of discussion today, which, as today is Friday the 9th of May, assuming that we release on Friday the 9th of May, I have a firm belief we will achieve it. It's World Chameleon Day, and so we're going to be talking about chameleons, chameleon diversity, chameleon ecology, all of that kind of thing. So stay tuned. In a couple of seconds, we'll be back and talking about chameleons. And we're back. Now we're going to talk about some chameleon things. I think we haven't really touched on chameleon diversity very often on the show before. Maybe back at episode 1 where we basically touched on all things herpetology. But I think maybe we can just kind of start with the basics. What is a chameleon? And so the answer to that question is a chameleon is any member of the family Chameleonidae. And so there's Chameleonidae today contains 214 described species, but new species are being described all the time. Basically every year we have at least a couple of species being described. The speed of description has decreased a little bit in recent years, but it may tick up again once some of the let's say, problem taxa are addressed. So
they're getting worse at camouflaging. So
well, no, but there are all these species complexes that need to be resolved, and we've made a lot of progress in recent years resolving some of them, but other ones have been very difficult to resolve, and so museomics processes have been involved. So we've been sequencing the types in order to basically figure out where does this belong, and some of the results we've gotten from that have been very surprising.
I should say before the comments come in, yes, I know they don't primarily change color for camouflage.
Yes.
I was making a joke.
Not at the individual level, but at the species level, definitely. Yes. That's really interesting. So yes. While chameleon color, okay, so maybe we can debunk some myths about chameleons.
Yeah, let's start there, yeah.
Yeah, so chameleons mostly change color reflecting their mood. They do have some level of color control related to their environment, but it is not nearly as plastic as various edited videos on YouTube would lead you to believe. Those videos are extremely damaging for the scientific image of chameleons because people have this misconception about how awesome the color change is, and it's really way less exciting than you.
You know what? For that, go look at cuttlefish. Just
exactly. I mean, if anything can change their color incredibly, it's really cuttlefish, octopus, and the other cephalopods are really just a world unto themselves in this way.
That's a different podcast.
A very different podcast, exactly. But I think there are chameleons are very, do have a significant amount of color change ability. That ability is limited to existing patterns on the body. So every area of the body has a specific limitation on the number of colors that it can kind of adopt, and kind of the way that patterning exists. So if there are spots and stripes, those stripes cannot move on the body. The spots cannot move on the body, but the spots can be emphasized or taken away completely, and likewise with the stripes and things. So the patterning of the animal is more or less laid down. We have a really good understanding from recent work of how that works, what the mechanisms are that achieve those patterns and the color. And it's not as simple as we used to think. There are more mechanisms involved than we originally thought. But a lot of it has to do with alignment of different cell layers, alignment of different the crystals that are within the xanthophores of the skin, the yellow cells of the skin. They can change their orientation, which changes the color. In addition to that, there are changes in the melanophores, the cells that contain melanin, just like you have in your own skin. Those cells can basically spread out the melanin or retract the melanin, and that changes the overall appearance of the animal, the color.
And it's basically a heightened version of what's present in many other lizards.
Exactly. And you'll see that many other lizards can have a reasonably good control over their color. So if you ever see, for instance, a day gecko, Phelsuma, in stressed coloration, it's a very dark lizard. In happy coloration, it's an extremely bright colored lizard. And in essence, what chameleons are doing is an expansion on
and we'll talk about that in later when I talk about chameleon lookalikes.
Yeah, exactly. Any other myths that I can debunk here while we're on the show? Any thoughts about what do people often think about chameleons that
they are the only lizards that can look in different directions. Which is not
that's
true.
Deeply not true. So chameleons famously. So what I like to think about chameleons, we'll come back to this because we have a whole section later on about the weird things that chameleons do, about lookalikes. What I like to think about chameleons is chameleons actually aren't doing basically anything unique. There are a couple of things that are pretty special, but there are at least good analogues in other groups. But they are a unique conglomeration of a set of traits that you don't see anywhere else. And
they have taken the traits to a higher degree.
Exactly. So, for instance, looking in many different directions. Well, anoles can look in different directions at the same time. Okay, they don't have at the same extent of eye movement that chameleons do, and they might not use the same accommodation cues. So chameleons can have three-dimensional vision with a single eye because they use what's called accommodation cues in order to get depth perception from that eye. But then they can also swing the eyes forward to get true binocular vision, plus the accommodation gives them extremely precise distance judgment, which, as you can imagine, is very important for hitting a prey item off of a leaf. They do still miss, not very often, but they do still miss sometimes when they're shooting a prey item or misjudge the distance or something. But it also means that a chameleon with a single eye can still eat. which is very useful. And you do, I would say it's not ultra rare to encounter chameleons that have lost an eye in the field. It's actually a little bit more common to encounter chameleons that have lost the tip of the tail. The tip of the tail or a limb are very common injuries. And that also reflects the fact that chameleon camouflage is not the best in the world. It's not terrible, but chameleons augment it through, for instance, their rhythmic movement. So there's this characteristic swaying movement, which is very typical for chameleons. You do see it in other animals, especially mantises and walking sticks use the same swaying techniques from side to side and
but even vine snakes and
vine snakes do this as well. All kinds of animals will do this because it allows you to blend in, even if you are not like the perfect shape mimic for whatever you're doing. There are some cases like leaf chameleons in both the African leaf chameleons and the Malagasy leaf chameleons. Some of them really do look very much like leaves, but for the most part, they're not especially camouflage to look like an environment. Like, it's not mimicry of some kind of habitat in the way that, for instance, a Europlatus might mimic a leaf, which is a much more advanced level of mimicry-based camouflage. And so the hands and their feet are very weird, and that's another kind of key characteristic of chameleons. So chameleons in general have limbs much more below the body than the vast majority of other SquaMates. And so chameleons are acrodonts. That means that they belong to this group called Acrodontia, and the other group of modern lizards that's in the family Acrodontia, in the group called Acrodontia, are the agamid lizards. So the agamids are the modern sister to chameleons. But agamids have very sprawling posture, except for the ones that live on very thin branches, which kind of do move their limbs underneath. But chameleons have truly like downward facing limbs, and that kind of is a significant adaptation. And then in addition to that, they have this weird hand organization that at some point on Twitter we coined the term chameleodactyly, because a lot of people were calling them zygodactylus. Zygodactyl is the state in parrots where you have these two even bundles. And when the definition of zygodactyl is even bundles, which doesn't make any sense. Now, if you were to Latinize uneven bundles, which is what chameleons have, because they have a bundle of 2 and 3, and I think the hands are 2 and 3, and the feet are 3 and 2, but it might be the other way around. Can't remember. I have to look at one. But the scientific term for that would be anisophaculodactyly, which is maybe not quite as
catchy.
Nice.
How about koala-footed?
Well, yeah, but koalas also have a weird, like koalas are more Spocky, koalas are also weird. No, they have 2 thumbs, and I guess it's not dissimilar from a koala.
The chameleons of mammals.
Yeah, and I'm gonna talk about that later also, because there are some lizards that have a stage, an earlier stage of that. Present.
Yeah, exactly. So and that's an adaptation, as you can imagine, to grasping narrow branches. It gives you a true grasping hand. And that's why you see all these memes, very cute pictures of chameleons grasping swords, because they can in a way that many other, like, so if you can hand a little Playmobil or toy sword to a chameleon or a cocktail stick or whatever, and they'll grab it because their hand is really, really good for grasping, which you can't say for an agamid, for instance. Agamids in general are pretty rubbish at grabbing anything.
At swordplay.
And swordplay, of course. Chameleons, on the other hand, excellent at swordplay. Then there are all kinds of other features of chameleons that kind of really set them apart. There's anatomical stuff in the skull, especially, that's super weird for chameleons. The vertebral column is pretty specialized and unique for chameleons. And what this means is, all of this stuff together basically means that when you look at an animal that is a chameleon, you know that it's a chameleon. Even the weirdest ones are like pretty clearly chameleons. And this is where we dive into the fossil record problem, because chameleons don't have one. There are basically 3 major chameleon fossils. Well, there's 4, but one of them is actually an albinopertontid amphibian. So we can discount that one. Yes, exactly. So this thing, and that's related to the tongue mechanism. So we haven't talked about the tongue. Let's do the tongue real quick. Chameleon tongues are totally crazy. They have a very special coiled bundle of coiled collagen fibers in the tongue that go around a very modified hyoid bone, which forms a rod at the base of the tongue that basically is like if you held 3 fingers up in front of you in kind of like as if you were going to hold an orange in the first 3 fingers of your hand, your thumb and your other 2 fingers. That's the shape of this thing with the tongue coiled on your pointer finger. And to release, the chameleon basically releases the elastic tension on this, and it shoots out very fast and very far, in some cases twice the length of the body. So these animals have extremely long elastic tongues that are very good at capturing prey. They're also very sticky, and they form suction when they grab onto the thing. So they're like optimized for prey capture, right? But they're not the only animals that have this kind or a similar kind of tongue projection mechanism. Specifically, various different plethodontid salamanders have what we call a ballistic tongue as well. But in the case of the salamanders, it's not anchored on the hyoid bone, like in the throat, although the hyoid is involved. It's actually anchored on the hip. So in salamanders, they're shooting the entire bone out of the body, which chameleons don't do. So I'm given to understand
they shoot from the hip.
Yeah. I don't know if that's been used in the title of a paper yet, but it urgently needs to be.
There you go.
Incredible. I will bring that to the attention of Dr. Chris Anderson, who works on chameleon tongue projection and various other topics. So you know, these salamanders, especially hydromantes, for instance, of which there's really awesome footage online, have incredible shooting mechanism as well. They are around the same size as some of the dwarf chameleon, leaf chameleons, but because they're amphibians, they're just way, way worse at it than chameleons are. So they're salamanders are just really bad at hitting their targets at the best of times, like frogs are as well. I just watched a fantastic YouTube video the other day of a series of misses with frogs jumping after dragonflies, trying to catch dragonflies. It's just so funny.
I think that might be from an Attenborough.
I believe it is cutouts from an Attenborough documentary. But yeah, I mean, chameleons rarely miss. They're extremely good. It does happen, but they're very, very good at hitting their prey. And there's a whole bunch of research we do not have time to go into, but there's a lot of research on how the chameleon tongue works, how chameleon vision works, how chameleon color change works, because these are such interesting and unique and exciting animals.
Do we know, with their vision, do we know, we've studied much on how they're able to do depth perception. Do you know what their color vision is like?
It's very good.
I would assume, right?
Yeah.
Most
I asked
lizards,
because I brought up cuttlefish before, and I always found it fascinating.
Most lizards have, as far as we know, has very acute color vision.
Very.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to say cuttlefish don't actually see color, but they've done studies with and so
they use
curious.
sepia tones. But that's literally why it's called sepia, because it's from the ink of the cuttlefish. So it's not actually a funny joke. Chameleons have excellent color vision, and that relates to the other thing that we know about chameleons is that they are like hypervisual animals. Everything about them is for visual display or camouflage. So it's like they are highly aware of their environments. They can see it all at the same time. They can distinguish a lot of it. And so that's why chameleons famously have a lot of different ornaments going on.
I was going to say they have a lot of head ornamentation and things like horns and crests and
whoever has seen chameleons or chameleon-like lizards in their natural habitat know that they can see you from far
yes, they will see you first. So I'm holding up to the camera Chameleon deramensis, which is a species. This specimen was collected in Tanzania. It's quite widespread across various different mountains. And these are quite funny. They look like they've got lipstick on. They've got these pink lips, but they've got these 3 very distinct horns on their head as well. And in addition to those 3 head horns, they have a crest going down the back. They've got a high casque going on, and then they have these flaps on the back of the ears, these occipital lobes, as we call them, that they can also flare out. So if they're displaying, they show off what they've got. Depending on the context of the display, they might also open the mouth, they gape display, and they'll hiss, they go, which is really just them breathing out. But all in all, these animals can put on a pretty shocking display to a predator. And then when you see them interacting with each other, they're often, showing off what colors they can manifest. Sometimes those colors
and they have
really
to do
shocking.
that because they're not fast. So
they're not fast and they're not vocal.
Have to.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about the vocal because I feel like
slow.
I remember reading something about that there may be some infrasound use.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that to really give a comment on it. I would say that so chameleon, so the leaf chameleons, when you pick them up, especially Brachysia, when you pick them up, they vibrate in your hand, and we think that they do that in order to basically get a bird to drop them. But it's not really clear. It's quite funny. Like you pick them up and go.
I'm getting a call.
Yeah, exactly. It really feels like a vibrating phone. That's exactly the same.
Like a lot of insects do that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So cicadas will do the same thing when you pick them up. And
beetles do that too.
Yeah.
I wonder if because I think about, you look at the head structures on, on
they have no external ear apparatus. So there's chameleons all have no external tympanum to their ear. The inner ear bones are all still there and they can still hear. But hearing has kind of been, it's kind of a classical compromise when we think about like there is a competition for space of the various sensory organs in an organism, in terms of brain, in terms of head, right? You've got to balance these things. How big can your ears be?
They put all their skill points in eyeball.
Exactly. Perception, limited to sight, largely. They can probably still smell fine. They definitely still lick branches to do scent tracking, especially when males are pursuing females. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the hierarchy is definitely vision, very, very much higher than anything else. And then somewhere lower down is probably scent, and then way down is hearing. It's not really a priority at all. So I think those are the key kind of the key understanding of that. And that when you think about that is what shapes a lot of the anatomy that we see when we look at a chameleon. So you just have to think about how visual these animals are. And maybe it's also worth mentioning, because I think a lot of people have this preconception that chameleons are all arboreal lizards, right? They're tree dwelling lizards. But in fact, it's
in the name, though. I mean,
is it?
Yeah, ground lion, I think, right?
I think it actually is referring to. I think it means camel, doesn't it? Camel lion?
Well, now I don't know.
I'm not sure
but
what the etymology is anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it was.
I can Google that quickly.
Yeah, chameleon. Here we
go.
I know
lion is in there, but.
Oh no, you're right. On the ground, kamai, as in on the ground.
Yeah, that's what. Okay, all right.
Yeah, you were absolutely right. Yeah.
As opposed to lions being
that fly.
What?
Yeah, it's traditionally they live in the sky.
Yeah.
But I think it's in reference to one of the little desert dwelling.
Well, it has to be the European one, the only one that is found in Europe. Because that one is the one that people were familiar with, I would imagine. The one who named it.
I mean, yes, they would not have encountered Chameleon namaquensis until much later.
But the European one is arboreal.
Yeah, the European one is definitely arboreal. So I don't know why it would be called ground lion. But yes, that apparently is the etymology of the original name. Yeah, good point. Attested very early on in the at least in English corpus, but certainly earlier in Greek, actually.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a reference to one of the little desert ground dwelling.
It can't be. There aren't any in that area of the world.
That is so weird.
Yeah. I actually have a specimen of Chameleon namaquensis right here. So for those of you who are watching on the video feed, you can see that I've got behind me a whole selection of chameleons, and if I can find the silly namaquensis, is it?
See, it's camouflaged again.
It was in fact hiding behind another one. So Chameleon namaquensis is one of the weirdest of the chameleons, and we'll definitely talk about that a little bit more later. So I think that is so right. The point that I wanted to make was there's a although the original meaning of the name is ground lion, there is this preconception that chameleons are arboreal lizards, and yes, the vast majority of chameleons are arboreal lizards, but there are 4 genera of truly terrestrial or largely terrestrial chameleons, which it's worth talking about. So chameleons as a family, 214 described species, are divided into 2 subfamilies. The subfamilies are Bruchisiinae, which contains just 2 genera, Brachysia and Paleon. Both of them are from Madagascar. And then on the other side of the tree is the Chameleoninae. And the Chameleoninae includes all of the big chameleons, the arboreal species, and then also includes Ripelion and Rampholion, which are 2 leaf chameleons from Eastern Africa. And there is a book that is extremely hard to get a copy of, called Leaf Chameleons, and I only have the German version of the book, which is called Stummelschwanz-Chameleons, Miniaturdrachen des Regenwaldes. Yes, drink. And so this book was published at a time before it was realized that Brachysia and Rampholion, or Brachysia, Paleon, Rampholion, and Ripelion had nothing evolutionarily to do with each other.
I remember those times.
So that's interesting. So exactly. The little micro chameleons.
So it was thought that these things all were closely related to each other for a very long time. And
Rampholion and all those are not that small as Brachysia. So.
But some of them are very small. Some of the Rampholion are very small, and some of the Brachysia are very big. So there's definitely an overlap in terms of body size, but the anatomy of the 2 different groups is quite different, I would say. So, so Rampholion and Ripelion both have relatively vertical shape to them. They are both kind of teardrop in cross section, whereas Brachysia are kind of more square or rectangular. Maybe even hexagonal in cross section, and that has to do with the shape of the vertebral column itself. There's this, that's part of the history of these 2 groups, and ecologically, those groups are quite similar to each other. So they live on the leaf litter at night. They are all diurnal. All chameleons are diurnal. Again, speaking to the fact that these are very visually oriented predators. And they, at night, the Brachysia and the Rampholion Ripelion will all crawl up into branches or low-hanging vegetation to sleep. So they actually are using that arboreal niche or that arboreal ability, the ability to climb with their silly little grasping feet, in order to take advantage of that as a kind of sleeping opportunity. Which, this relates to the fact that there's basically no fossil record. And I just realized that we actually still have to get back to that point. But let me finish this one first. So the on the other hand, the diurnal chameleons, the arboreal chameleons, they belong to this big group in the Chameleoninae, but it's not clear how many instances there were. So if all of them were originally small and leaf-like, and then many of them independently got big, or if they're what the ancestor looked like. And that is related to this problem of the fossil record, right? So discounting this one from the Burmese amber that turned out to be an amphibian, we're now left with a totally empty fossil record, because the only fossils that really exist are these three taxa. Two of them are from Europe and are recent, like within the last 10 million years or something. Chameleons as a group are maybe 40 to 60 million years old, so they're not a young group of lizards. And then the next one is one that was called Kalama Beniowski, from an island in the middle, I believe, of like Lake Tanganyika, which is a topic for another podcast, because that is a extremely problematic taxon. But in any case, it is also way too young to have any bearing on the evolutionary story here. And so in the fossil record,
it's a cichlid probably.
In the fossil record, out of nowhere, chameleons. And those
are forest animals that don't preserve ever.
Right?
Arboreal and forest animals.
Yes.
We have zero knowledge
really
what they are. Arboreal. Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody.
And it's all
Created
relatively.
by God in one day.
It's all relatively recent. We have nothing in the post KPG. We have no fossils from Madagascar until the last 5 million, 10 million years. So we have no informative idea of what happened in Madagascar.
60 million at the oldest then. So
yeah, something.
Right after the. Yeah, it's one of those things that probably.
Yeah.
But that's what the molecular clock says, right?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
So it's one of those lineages that exploded right after the KPG.
Yeah. Probably. Now, the problem is that the phylogeny of chameleons is very poorly resolved in the published record. There was a paper from Crystal Tolley and colleagues published in 2013 that is still today, 12 years later, the best paper, basically the only real paper on this topic. There have been some subsequent works, but they didn't actually improve any of the sampling. And largely that's my fault, because I, as part of my PhD, did a big project looking at the evolution of chameleons. We have a much better phylogeny of these chameleons that has not seen the light of day. And well, I only take part of the blame. I would also put a good portion of the blame on some pretty unkind editors who just brutally rejected the paper in, I think, 6 successive journals. And that was around the time when I realized this is not really worth our time. The reason, so that's kind of peripheral to the main central point of the paper. The paper was actually looking at the evolution of ornamentation within chameleons, which I think is a very interesting topic. And so the tree problem was not a problem at all. The tree part of that project, they would have been like, yeah, cool, go through. But they didn't like the rest of the analysis, which, I think shows a significant lack of imagination on their part. But in any case, they didn't like it, and they didn't like it so much that it basically just died in my hands. And so someday I hope that we'll see the light of day, but at the moment it's kind of in a very bad position. And so we're still left with that original paper of the chameleon phylogeny, wherein it was contended that chameleons probably originated in mainland Africa and colonized Madagascar possibly twice. Now, when you have a scenario like this, where you have a group of chameleons, 2 groups of chameleons from Madagascar that are not closely related to each other, and another group of chameleons from mainland Africa, where the one group of chameleons from Madagascar is nested inside that African group, there are 2 scenarios that are essentially equally favorable. One of them is an origin in Madagascar with colonization to mainland Africa, and possibly a back colonization to Madagascar. That's just as likely as an origin in mainland Africa and 2 colonizations of Madagascar, because it's a two-step, and we don't have an ability to polarize it because we don't have any fossils. So that's really difficult. And then we have another lineage, very problematic one.
But what you're saying, they absolutely rafted back and forth one way or the other.
Almost certainly. Yeah, I mean,
at that point,
definitely.
This is a species that dies if you look at it wrong in captivity, but...
Yeah, but many of them have almost a year-long incubation periods for their eggs.
Ah, okay.
And there's a whole bunch that are live-bearing. Now, there are none in Madagascar that are live-bearing, But both of those things can contribute. And also, I would say that most animals are much more robust in their natural habitat than they are in captivity.
Yes, and also those live-bearing and egg-laying can change fairly quickly. Very quickly in evolution.
Yeah.
So I also have here, so these are what are called Archaeus tigris, the only species from the genus Archaeus, which is native to the Seychelles. So we also have a chameleon species in the Seychelles, which kind of messes with all of the rest of the things. Seychelles is a continental crust piece that got left behind as India was making a beeline for the Himalayas, or was making a beeline in order to make the Himalayas.
Because we have to remind people that India was part of Gondwana. It was part of the southern continents and then rafted all the way up to Asia.
And it used to be attached to Madagascar. And actually, Madagascar and India left Africa together. They said bye-bye. And they were a continent that creatively is called India-Gascar, which at least is easy to remember. And then India fucked off and left the Seychelles behind on its way. And consequently, Madagascar was left isolated. And that already happened. Like, that isolation was there from like 80 million years ago. So there's no question that chameleons were on one of those land masses. But like, we don't have ability to resolve it because we don't have fossils. And as Gabriel, you correctly pointed out, these are forest lizards. We're not likely to get good fossils unless we have, and they're very small fossils as well. So even if they got, washed downstream and they would accumulate in a big bed, doing anything with them would be a huge nightmare.
And nothing ate them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Also, they have like delicate little bones.
They do, but the skull is highly integrated. So there's a decent chance that a skull or a skull piece would kind of be preserved. And in fact, that Koloma-Beniowski specimen is a largely intact, articulated skull specimen, three-dimensional.
Yeah, but forest in tropical places?
Your chances are so low. Low. Yeah. So that's the other thing to mention, maybe. We haven't really talked about the distribution of chameleons today. So obviously, Madagascar has about half of the species. The other half are mostly in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. But then there are a few species that are also north of the Sahara. You have some in the Arabian Peninsula, you've got one species in India, and then you have one native species in Europe, as well as an introduced species in Europe as well. And then various different populations have been introduced elsewhere, so I think there are at least
Hawaii,
two, if not three species
Florida.
Introduced in Florida. There's at least one species introduced in Hawaii. And where they get introduced, they actually tend to do fairly well. And so people are ranching them, for instance, in Florida.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can be shot, apparently, for
well, you can be shot because they are protecting their investment. And also you're entered private property a lot of times when you're trying to get...
Damn.
Yes, exactly. So one has to be careful. Now, I think that is.
But I must say, it's not uncommon to just randomly find chameleons in some parks in South Florida. It's not uncommon. It has happened to me. So,
Gabriel, I'm coming down there, and we're gonna go.
You definitely have to. Well, I'm between Florida and Texas right now, so you have to catch me when I'm there. I'm actually traveling there tomorrow.
Okay.
So I wanted to, if it's okay with you guys, if we still have the time, I'd like to just give you a brief introduction to the different genera, because it happens that here at the Natural History Museum, I have all of them but one at my disposal. Is that true? Probably true. We'll see. I think I have all of them but one at my disposal, and so we can talk through some of them because I think it really helps to give it a kind of vision. So I'll try and open up the jars and show them as much as I can. So I'll start with Brachysiinae, which comprises two genera. There's Paleon, which is the genus that I do not have. And there is also Brachysia. Paleon only has two species. They're little leaf-shaped things. They have a very vertical body shape, and they have a little thing coming off of the nose. They're very cute little lizards. And actually, I will have one as soon as I manage to export my recent stuff from Madagascar, which will be very cool. I'll have several, actually. So, but Brachysia tend to be very small. They tend to be flat-backed, although there is one group that has a vertical back as well. And actually, Brachysia come in two flavors. There are Brachysia, the one subgenus, which contains the largest species. The smallest species in that group is probably Brachysia thieli, which is, I don't know, like for the American listeners, a bit over an inch long. For the European and everywhere else listeners is about 3 centimeters probably. The species I have in my hand here is Brachysia stumphi, a species from northern Madagascar, and they have a really interesting body structure. They've got spines coming out the side, but these are really terrestrial chameleons. You find them during the day on the ground hunting in the leaf litter, and then at night
how do they stack up for miniaturization? Since you're such a
so they have a lot of traits that show kind of a miniaturized anatomy, especially so this is Brachysia. They have some traits that show miniaturized anatomy. So they have a significantly enlarged eye relative to the head, but that's to do with the allometry of the scaling of the eye. Basically, there's been priority put on growing the eye versus the other aspects of the body. You see differences in the actual scale structures, that I don't know if those are related to miniaturization or not. And then the internal anatomy, that one of the big compromises of being a tiny chameleon is having a very small clutch size. And all of these things, they might lay 5 or 6 eggs at a time at most. Most of them don't have things larger than that. Whereas for comparison, Chameleon calyptoratus, if it's not raised correctly, you can have over 100 babies in a single clutch. And that can be a serious problem. So that's the one group. And then the other subgenus, I don't have the other subgenus here, unfortunately, but the other subgenus is called Evoluticauda, and that's the smallest amniotes in the world. So, for instance, Brachysia nana, Brachysia micra, Brachysia minima, Brachysia teddy, Peleorazi, etc. These are all very small. Yeah, exactly. They're very, very small chameleons, and we've often named them for things that kind of demonstrate how ridiculously small they are.
Brachysia, little guy, EI.
Yeah, essentially, yes. And they really show strong adaptations for miniaturization. They are much smaller, much more brittle, and have very thin limbs. They're very, very slow. By comparison to some of the larger animals, they're just incredibly slow. And then some of the other things that are weird about them. So, for instance, Brachysia tuberculata is, funnily enough, reminds me a little bit of salamanders in some ways, because the densities that they can occur at is insanely high in some places, like hundreds dozens per square meter in some places in the north of Madagascar, like hugely dense populations. It's the only species of Brachysia that has that kind of population density. But it really reminds me of kind of salamanders.
But still small clutch sizes. So how are
tiny
they doing
too?
That?
Yeah, well, very, very large population size. You can imagine that when you open up the opportunity where a thrip or a columbolin or some other thing living in the leaf litter is a good meal for you, suddenly there's no resource limitation at all. Mm-hmm. And so maybe your environment can sustain extremely high densities because you're not really in competition. So that's kind of the go-to hypothesis that we have there.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Brachyzinae, and we can kind of set the Brachyzinae aside. And then comes the other group. So let's stay on the leaf chameleons.
And wait, those still have the little hands?
Yeah. They still have clasping hands. They have a prehensile tail, but only the very tip of the tail is prehensile. And the tail is very short. So it doesn't make a loop ever. It can't make a full loop. And they also have some pretty unique skull adaptations, some shapes of the skull that are very different from many of the other chameleons. So let's go over to the other side, and we can also start there with some of the leaf chameleons. So basically, there are two groups of leaf chameleons from chameleonine, and they're not closely related to each other, which is also kind of weird. They are Ripelion brevicaudatus, I'll show that in a second, and Rampholion. And I don't know who decided to have these very confusing names, but here we are. By the way, let me just
tail.
Yeah, exactly. So Ripelion are really interesting for a few reasons. Of chameleons, they have by far the shortest tail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
it's a teeny tiny tail. They have a little funny flap underneath the chin, which is quite cute. And then you can see what I meant before with this kind of teardrop-shaped cross-section. Very vertical animals, much like the larger chameleons, actually, but these teeny tiny tails. So they've kind of disposed with, the tail is still prehensile, but it can't really bend very far. And in a male, like the specimen I have in my hand, the base of the tail is entirely full of hemipenes, And so it can't really bend that bit either. So it's got a limitation.
So they look
there.
like a short edamame pod.
A little bit. I mean, it looks a lot like a leaf. So you can imagine if this was crawling around and it got disturbed, it would fall flat on the ground and look just like a leaf and be easily overlooked. When it came to trying to sequence these specimens, which we did try to do, we tried to sequence a specimen for its transcriptome. We discovered that there is a serious problem in Ripelion, which is that they have seemingly essentially microfractured their genomes. So their genome has essentially fallen apart, which is a weird thing. So they have loads of chromosomes, loads and loads of chromosomes. I don't know how many it is, but it's just far too many for a vertebrate. And probably their chromosomes have essentially, the chromatin has kind of lost cohesion or something. There's something very weird happening with them. It makes them phylogenetically very difficult to place because it actually changes mutation rates across the genome. And so they always wind up with a super long branch, which is a pain in the ass. So finding exactly where they sit phylogenetically is quite difficult. And then on the other side of the tree...
So they're like salamanders in that regard, too. They have enormous...
yeah, well, the genome is not huge, but it's just inconvenient.
Fracture, which is odd. I didn't even know that could happen.
Chromosome evolution is one of the weirdest things you will ever try not to learn about. It's just so ridiculous. Okay, and then on the other side of the tree, and remember, these are not closely related animals at all. Well, not especially closely related, like not much more closely related than they are to any other groups of chameleons. We also have a leaf chameleon belonging to the genus Rampholion, which has also dramatically shrunk the tail. Now, not all Rampholion have a super shrunk tail. This species that I have in my hand, which is Rampholion unchiensis, is a fairly large species of Rampholion. Some of them are about half of this size, probably. So they do get pretty small. And Rampholion are, again, very largely terrestrial, but some of them actually live in like the low underbrush, let's say. So they are kind of arboreal. And I can say the same for Brachysia. There is at least one species of Brachysia, which is Brachysia... What's the name? It'll come back to me. Anyway, there's one species of Brachysia that is almost entirely arboreal, in fact. And it's in the pet trade. I just can't remember the name off the top of my head. Maybe we'll see it as we go through some of the books afterward. So those are the two dwarf chameleons from Africa, not closely related leaf chameleons, but they are super interesting anatomically and good to keep in mind because, again, we've got these two different groups of leaf chameleons that are doing very leaf chameleon-y things, but are somehow independently evolved from one another. Like there's almost no chance that this is the ancestral state, especially because the anatomy of the tail and the head and all these different things is very different. So yeah, so those are the species. And then within the rest of the Chameleoninae is divided into a whole bunch of other genera. I think it's 8, but we'll kind of see as we go along. So I mentioned Archaeus tigris already. Archaeus tigris, this species from the Seychelles. It looks like a perfectly normal chameleon, but it turns out that it's probably sister to Ripelion. So that tells us that Ripelion has done something super weird, but that also could be an artifact of these ridiculous chromosomes that Ripelion has. Like we're not really certain what's going on there. Archaeus has the ecological fun fact that they've forgotten how to lay eggs. So most chameleons bury their eggs. Archaeus strew their eggs haphazardly, often over things like pineapple plants, which don't grow natively, but they are introduced there. They just, because I guess no predators in the Seychelles, they just screw it, I'll just... And so they're just like
pigeons, right?
It's funny. Yeah. I guess it reminds me a little bit of pigeons. Yeah. So our guys are kind of weird in that respect. They're from several of the islands of the Seychelles, and there are rumors that there will be more species in that group at some point. People have made a claim, but I don't think that they have yet substantiated that claim. So yes, that's Archaeus. It's one of the very interesting things about, or very interesting. One of the standout characters of Archaeus is it too has this little gular flap thing going on underneath its chin, which we also see, for instance, in Ripelion.
And the name Archaeus it's because it sounds to me
means
like
ancient lizard.
Yeah, why? Like, is it?
It's very deep phylogenetically.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was about to ask you. Yeah. So it's a basal.
And Paleon, by the way, also means very old lizard. So it's or very old lion in this case. Again, referring to the depth of those two lineages. So one of the things about Brachysia that again makes them very annoying to analyze, actually, in the context of a lot of the other things, is that they have ridiculously long branch lengths. Like in the phylogeny, the species are separated by such deep lengths. And maybe that means that they have different evolutionary rates going on. Maybe they just have they isolate much quicker, and therefore you have less mixture.
How long are we talking about?
Like the entire genus Columma is, I think, as old as the break between some of the sister species within Brachysia. So,
which is how many millions?
35 maybe.
Oh, wow.
20 million. I don't know. Some of them are just ridiculously long. I don't remember the calibration, like the branch lengths anymore. But yeah, they're very, very long branches. Okay. Let's work then up in size. The next size up would be our beautiful chameleons of the genus Bradypodion. So the Bradypodion chameleons are largely distributed in South Africa, or Southern Africa, but especially South Africa. Lots of different species here. And there's a lot of research going on Bradypodion in particular, because several of them are quite well adapted to surviving in human environments, and because there are a lot of research groups who are just there and interested in working on them. So Crystal Tully's group, for instance, has done really, really cool work on Bradypodion. They've been mentioned, I think, on the Herpetology Highlights podcast, talking about Thunderdome studies on these things because of the way that they interact with each other as well. And then there's been some other stuff looking at, for instance, bite strength in these chameleons and its relationship with kind of open or closed habitat. So lots of different interesting things happening with Bradypodion. Bradypodion are one of my nightmare lizards in terms of identification. Some of them are really, really, really hard to tell apart, and the keys only work poorly. And in many cases, by the way, the keys for chameleons are based entirely on males, because the females lack the very strongly male-selected secondary sexual characteristics that can make them really, really hard to tell apart. So there are several species where the females of two different closely related species are essentially indistinguishable based on our current knowledge. And it's not clear to me whether or not that's true, or just because we've put less effort into it.
Likely.
But I don't know. I think there's a good chance that they actually are relatively conserved, because unless the traits are being dragged along by the male selection, there's a good chance that the females would just be conserved. But
don't be surprised. It's one of those things that once you look at them closer,
if you look in intimate detail, you probably would find something. At very least in the genetics, it's very clear. But yeah. So some of the Bradypodion species are really cool because, not this one, so I'm holding up Bradypodion pumilum, but there are species of Bradypodion that have bare flesh exposed on the side. So they have areas without scales, which is super rare at species level. So it happens in snakes very rarely, and then people select for it, and then you get these scaleless snakes. But it's super, super rare in other groups, and it's very rare at a species as a species level trait. But there are some species of Bradypodion that have that going on. Bradypodion also have kind of weird shaped casques and crests, which kind of sets them apart from a lot of the other things.
Do those areas have a particular coloration?
Yeah, pink, like their skin color. No, it's just skin. There's no special color underneath them.
Oh, really? So they don't flash it? They don't...
No, not that I've seen. Yeah.
Okay.
But it might be for dealing with very high heat, for instance. Although chameleon skin, I would say, is highly permeable to moisture, and is also it absorbs heat very fast, I would guess. Yeah. So ecologically, I haven't mentioned yet, but ecologically, chameleons are obviously predators, and they're what we call cruise foragers, which means that they're basically always on the move, and then they find any food as they're going around. They're zapping bugs left and right, and they can eat pretty fast in pretty quick succession. And because they're acrodont, they have these teeth that are welded to the jaw. They can crunch through pretty hard objects, so they can eat, hard beetles and weevils and stuff that are inaccessible to some of the smaller, weaker-jawed lizards. And then I guess the next one over, let's just talk about Chameleon for a second, because Chameleon is quite funny. Let me just see, what have I got? Oh yeah, so most people are probably familiar with this species. This is Chameleon calyptratus, the veiled chameleon, or the Yemen chameleon, originally from Yemen, one of the northernmost distributed chameleons.
One of the ones introduced in Florida.
For instance, introduced in Florida,
I have been bitten by one of those, and it was a nasty bite.
I wanted to ask Ethan, have you actually ever kept chameleons?
We have. We had one for, I don't know, close to the better part of 10 years.
Wow. Which species?
I think it's just calyptratus.
Okay. So the other thing to mention about chameleons is that they're famously very short-lived.
Yes.
10 years is a very good lifespan for a chameleon.
It was struggling at the end there, and it might have been more like 8. I want to say, but it was a long time.
It was the crypt keeper of the chameleon.
Yeah.
It was actually my wife's chameleon when we first moved in together.
Oh, cool.
And his name was Rupert, and he was very ill-tempered all the time.
Yeah, that about sums it up. So chameleons are very sensitive to stress. They are, often will be quite vocal about not being very happy about you. They'll display at you, and mostly they want to be left alone, and they want to be kept in an environment that hides them as well as possible.
They don't make particularly great reptile pets.
Certainly not for non-huge enthusiasts and people who are new to the hobby. But if you are interested,
I was going to say,
please go look up the Chameleon Academy podcast. Bill Strand, a friend of mine, is the brain behind that project. It is incredible, the resources that he's put together, and where it used to be that we're kind of struggling to keep chameleons alive, we're now at the point where they've established multiple different species. We've got really, really good husbandry guidelines, and they're like really thriving in captivity. They're at the point where imports are no longer needed, which, for instance, for the Yemen chameleon is essential because we can't get any material out of Yemen while there's still civil war. So
one question before we keep delving into Chameleon, the name, the genus. How all chameleons are short-lived, or just most? As far as we know.
As far as we know, I think the oldest chameleon I've ever heard of was 14 years.
Oh, wow.
Which for
people listening, lizards tend to be relatively long lived.
So I mean, various different geckos can easily live 15 to 20, even longer.
I know of some lychees personally that are
lychees.
Like, close to 40.
But that group of geckos is also like they do things slow. And chameleons, although they seem slow, I mean, I wouldn't say that chameleons are the slowest lizard by a mile. Thorny devils, for instance, are way slower than chameleons to move in the same way, right?
Yeah.
But they're when chameleons want to book it, they really can, especially in 3 dimensions, which can make them quite inaccessible quite quickly. The weirdest of the so Chameleon is a widespread genus found across most of Africa, and also over into India. Camellia zeylanicus is over in India, and there's these species in Europe as well. And the deepest branch in Chameleon is Chameleon namaquensis, our little Namaqua chameleon. And what I love about namaquensis is it shows kind of the ridiculous adaptations to life in the harsh environment of the Namib Desert, because that's where it's found. It's only restricted to desert. It is largely terrestrial. And if you look at it in comparison to any of the other chameleons, chameleons, it's super different. So the tail is much shorter. The structure of the dorsal crest is totally different than in many of the other things. It's comprised of these broadly spaced kind of larger spines that are interspersed with teeny tiny little granules, so it looks just weird. And then the head is also, like, the whole body is super chunky, and then it's just got this tiny tail at the end, and the head is also quite chunky. So it's like
and little tiny legs.
Yeah.
And many of you have seen this chameleon in many documentaries, because it always appears in documentaries.
Yes. And they're behaviorally super interesting. They like live in a bush. They'll find a bush, and then they'll stay around there for a while, and then eventually maybe they move over to another bush. So chameleons tend to be quite philopatric. They like to be in a specific place, but some of them will range further than others. And over time, they will change that range. So it's not like I live in this tree and this is where I live my whole life. It's like I live in this tree for the next few weeks, and then suddenly I'm gone. And so maybe that helps to reduce the predictability of them and therefore the likelihood with which they get eaten. So Chamaeleo, the genus, was split. I don't know when it happened now, but it was split not that long ago. And the consequence of that split has been quite a few other genera. And so there's you might find, for instance, on labels like this one, so this is labeled Chameleon Vences, but this is in the genus Trioceras now. So because Chameleon was split, this Trioceras species was one of the ones that split off. And Trioceras
which means three horns.
Means three horns. Yeah. And this chameleon lives up to the name. So this again, Trioceras deramensis has three massive horns on the front of its head. Those horns are made of, it is a keratin sheath around bone. So there is bone there. So there is at least I think there is. So you can go look up CT scans of these things. Most of the genera, or all of the genera, and most of the species are represented on Morphosource. So you can go and find CT scans of these and look at the skeletons if you want. Chameleon skeletons are really, really cool, so I really recommend it. This one actually has the hemipenes on display, which we mentioned, we kind of talked about in the last episode. Hemipenes and chameleons are also really, really significant, highly divergent between the different genera. And these three horns, so Trioceras come with various different numbers of horns. Some of them, even within a species, they've got some populations with one horn and some with three, and some with none. And so there's a lot of variation going on there. Trioceras get big. So we've already talked about the smallest chameleons in the world. Raselimanana is currently the smallest, with males around 17 millimeters in snout vent length. At the other end of the spectrum, the largest African chameleon is Trioceras melleri.
Yeah.
Which I actually won't get this out of the alcohol because it's going to cover my entire desk in alcohol. But this is a very, very big chameleon, and this is a huge specimen that I have collected. It was received from Copenhagen Zoo in 1963, so this has been in our collection for a long time, and this is a really big boy. For those of you who cannot see the video over on YouTube, this chameleon is about the size of a house cat.
I was just gonna say it's like the size of a smallish cat. Yeah.
It's a. I mean, it wouldn't purr, but it would do.
What is the snout to vent length? The maximum, more or less?
For Meller's chameleon, I'm not really sure. I'll look it up if I can.
I've seen a few live individuals, and they're the most impressive to me. They're just
enormous. People are claiming that they can reach a total length of 60 centimeters, so 24 inches. So they can be pretty big lizards. I would say it would not surprise me if this is actually a little bit bigger than that, because it's a big boy. We have quite a lot of them in the collection because they're very popular in the zoo and have been for a long time. There's a lot of variation in body size in these things, but that's just the largest in Africa. Let's hop over to we've got one last African genus we'll just talk about quickly, and then we can hop over to the other side. So the last genus that we'll talk about from mainland Africa is Ineich. And Ineich are just awesome chameleons. They look so punk rock. Ineich are the African answer to the genus Kalama. And Kalama has a huge variety in the number of or the style of appendages on the head for display purposes. and Kineongia are just like that. So this species, Kineongia multituberculata, has these huge bony crests coming out of the head, and it's got these beautiful spines going down the back. It's just an absolutely gorgeous lizard, crazy. It looks like
it's one of the Godzilla monsters that has the big drill for a head.
Yeah. I know the one you're talking about. Yeah, it looks just like that. That's not a bad comparison. Yeah. So Kineongia is one of the, I guess, less understood, less frequently encountered, very rare in captivity genera. Also quite a number of different species going on over there. And then we hop over to the island of Madagascar. So in Madagascar, we have 2 genera of true chameleons. One of them is Kalama, and Kalama contains the largest chameleon in the world, the heaviest chameleon. That is this boy. This is Kalama parsoni, a Parsons chameleon. And this specimen was received from Madagascar in 1915.
Wow.
And it is again, kind of a house cat-sized lizard. This one is not as big as they get. They get really, really, really big and really heavy. And that's the thing about Kalama parsoni. Now, Kalama, very diverse genus, taxonomically may be in need of revision. The other end of the spectrum in Kalama is present as well. So I have here a little jar containing, I'll get it out. This is Kalama phallax. Phallax is one of the smallest of the Kalama species. And this is actually smaller than some of the large Rickesia species. This is an adult female.
They're arboreal?
Yes. And these are arboreal, little tiny twig chameleons. So when we think about anoles, we often talk about these different ecomorphs in anoles. Chameleons have many of the same ecomorphs, or at least very similar analogous groups. And these are twig chameleons in the way that twig anoles are twig anoles. So they occupy very much the same kind of ecomorph space. And they're tiny. And they belong to the same group, right? So putting them in contrast is a little bit ridiculous because it's, the one can easily eat the other. And then finally, our last genus that we'll talk about now is Furcifer. So people will be familiar with these because Furcifer pardalis is the panther chameleon, very popular in captivity. But another species that's actually being ranched in Florida is this one that I have in my hand, Furcifer ustaleti, Austerlitz chameleon. And these are the longest chameleons in the world. They get also huge.
This is if you unroll the tail.
If you unroll the tail, they get really, really, really big. And so there are... there are some relatively small Furcifer species as well that are maybe, not much bigger than 10 centimeters SVL, but none as small as some of the smallest Kalama species. So Furcifer and Kalama are the Malagasy representatives of the Chameleoninae. And that is our full taxonomic overview. Oh, now, how do we know so much about chameleons? How do I know so much about chameleons and why? Books, my friends, books. Now, and years of study. But I just want to highlight some books real quick before we're going to dive into chameleon lookalikes and their ecology. So let me just talk through them really quickly. I've already mentioned this one, The Dwarf Chameleons by Nechas and Schmidt. Good luck trying to find an English version. You probably will not be able to. They are ridiculously expensive when they do come on the market. If you're interested in chameleon biology, Tolley et al., is it? Tolley and Erel, Biology of Chameleons, fantastic book, published in, I want to say 2014 is correct. Yeah, so 2013, 2014. This book has chapters on a huge variety of different things about the ecology and biology and anatomy and behavior of chameleons, answering your basic needs. Of course, only updated until 2014, so any research that's happened in the last decade is, of course, not included here, but it's a really awesome foundation. It starts off with chameleon anatomy, goes into physiology, color adaptations, behavior and color change, ecology, life history, etc. If you're interested in diving deep into kind of chameleon who's it, what's it, this is the place to start. Excellent book. Can only recommend that one. Now, for Malagasy chameleons, I actually have two books that are kind of the most, well, I have two books. One of them is my Bible, Amphibians and Reptiles of Madagascar, the Field Guide to the Amphibians and Reptiles of Madagascar. And in that book, there is, this was published in 2007, so it's been a while. But it has a lot of the kind of essential information that would be in here. And for instance, you can kind of get a sense for some of what were at the time the smallest chameleons in the world. I'm showing a picture of one of those pages up on the YouTube video here. But yeah, so if we wanted to go and look up which species it was, that was the one that's highly arboreal that I can't remember the name of. It was the weird one. What's it called? Oh, can't remember. Ebanawi. Brukisia ebanawi. Yeah, which is very weird. Very strange chameleon. Anyway, it's excellent. It has very good imagery. Unfortunately, highly out of date, especially taxonomically. So I would refer the reader to my website, where you will find a page called Updates to the Glaw and Vences 2007 Field Guide that will give you a guide page by page to go through and at least update species names. It doesn't update any of the information, but it just tells you which species they are, because many of them have been totally overturned since the publication of this book. Then, at some point, I got this beautiful illustrated French and English field guide to the amphibians, to the chameleons of Madagascar, with beautiful, I guess these are probably acrylic paintings of the different species that are, however, practically useless for species identification, unfortunately, because they're not precise enough. So,
and also, why do they put them with a color background? That's not good.
Well, when you see a chameleon, it's going to have a color background. So I suppose that's the reason, but it is a bit odd. Yeah.
No, but the whole point of doing illustrations is to be able to compare them in a guide. So
yeah,
that's distracting.
My guess is that they did these illustrations on various colored paper.
For sure, but that's what I mean. Like, why?
In terms of aesthetic.
Well, it could also be that some graphic designer went hog on it.
Yeah, that's also possible. Anyway,
this is a graphic designer.
It's a beautiful book. It actually also has the accounts in Malagasy as well, so all three languages in here. Very rare. I've actually never seen another copy of it, so it's not an easy one to get. I don't have the Stipala Mountain Dragons book, which is a very well loved and known book on chameleons from mainland Africa. It is a coffee book, like coffee table style book. So it's a beautiful, huge and well illustrated book. I've just never gotten around to buying a copy of it. And then the last book I'll just highlight is Colin Tilbury's Chameleons of Africa, which is was published in a second edition in 2022, I want to say. Oh my God. Oh no. 2018. I bought it when it came out and it felt like it was 2022, and now I'm having a small existential crisis. Anyway, it's also, I mean, this is the least field guide you'll ever encounter. It is beautifully illustrated. Many like photos of most species, and then just like double page spreads of many of the species as well.
2018, all of those chameleons are probably dead now.
Exactly. Yes, that's true. So if you want a good overview,
so morbid.
So Colin Tilbury is an incredibly knowledgeable chameleon expert, has assembled all this data, and there are keys in here. There are identification like guidelines. There's distribution maps. There is ecology. He's like looked at the types of many of these species as well. So like the level of detail that is involved in this book just staggers the imagination. It's really incredible. It's not cheap and it's not light. But it is, if you're interested in African chameleons, there is no replacement for it. I don't have any of the other field guides to like East African reptiles or whatever that would also, make this list in a way. But I think like if you want an idea of the true diversity of chameleons, this is a good place to go. And then, or at least of African chameleons. We're lacking an equivalent book from Madagascar, which is probably related to the fact that there just aren't enough hours in the day for the people who are interested in that.
I was about to say that I just found out a new publication. Well, it's recent. It's from this year. And they say that pale chameleons distributed over 12 new counties in Florida. So they have expanded. They have reported their expansion in 12 new counties in Florida.
Yeah, and that's related to this.
It's all the swords everybody gave them.
Oh, and I actually forgot to mention which genera are live bearing and which one of them lay eggs, but I don't know if I could do that off the top of my head anyway. But anyway, many of these species are live bearing. Calyptratus is not one of them. So Chamaeleo are egg layers, but Calyptratus they quite easily become egg bound, which is a problem that we see in a lot of these different species. And if they're not kept appropriately according to the best modern techniques, it's especially if they're overfed, they tend to produce just ridiculous numbers of eggs, and then they get egg bound and then they die.
That's why most people in the hobby, like if you're just keeping them as pets, most people only want males.
Yeah, and this and one of the problems. So Trioceras were also quite popular. They're also introduced in Hawaii, for instance, and so that's Jackson's chameleons, Trioceras jacksoni. The trouble with Trioceras is that you don't know that your female is pregnant until you have suddenly 30 baby chameleons running around your cage, because she has had them in her the whole time, maybe when she was received by the exporter or whatever.
Well, they're mostly sold wild caught because not many people breed them.
But there is a big breeding project now that's made the situation a lot better.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that, like, if you actually want to get started, because I looked into a little bit, if you want to get started with breeding them, again, similarly, because most people seem to want males, the females are actually hard to, like a good breeding stock female is actually hard to come by.
Yeah. So we can mention just very briefly about the husbandry. So if you're interested in getting started with breeding chameleons, keeping chameleons, I think at the moment the recommendation is that first for pardalis are some of the best to start with. They're relatively easy to get. They're fairly forgiving in terms of their husbandry. Yes, they require relatively high humidity and moderately high temperatures, but I think they're going to be better able to deal with big temperature fluctuations than some of the montane chameleons. And Trioceras are up in the mountains in East Africa, so they're not necessarily the easiest ones to be keeping. In general, you want to have animals from the lowlands if you're going to do like starter animals in any case. And then Calyptratus are you can.
That's the most forgiving one that I've ever.
It's probably the most forgiving one, but it's also they tend to be quite hot tempered.
Yes.
But look into the resources, and I really strongly recommend going over to Bill Strand's universe over there and looking at all the resources that they put together, care sheets, beautiful website, all this stuff. And I've had several appearances on the Chameleon Academy podcast talking about various different groups of chameleons as well. Okay, so what I would propose now is that we have a short break, and then we are going to return with a brief section talking about chameleon lookalikes, chameleon ecological mimics and stuff. So stick around. In a couple minutes or a couple seconds, we'll be back. And we're back. And actually, we're joined by another guest, which is Gabriel's kitty cat, who is probably going to be participating in the audio. But if you recall the participation of a certain frog that I used to have in my office, then I think you'll forgive the occasional purr and meow in the background.
Yes.
But yeah, let's get to talking about some of the lookalikes, the weirdos, the kind of chameleon analogues that we find elsewhere.
Yeah. So what people know the most about chameleons, or one of the things that they know the most, like we talked before, is that the ability to change colors. But in fact, a huge amount of lizards are capable of distinct color changes. Probably not to the extreme that chameleons do, but it's even here in the United States, where we're familiar with the green and all. the green anole, that can switch colors very quickly from bright green to dark brown, and it just it's a matter of less than a minute. So I will concentrate on those lizards that have more attributes and that are similar adaptations that those presented by chameleons. And like we said earlier, chameleons have basically taken a lot of adaptations that other lizards have to a higher level. So it's I'm going to be concentrating on those that have several of those characteristics.
I've had people refer to green anoles as American chameleons.
Yeah,
that's actually what their original name was.
The original name, and it's a very common. Like, there are books published about the American chameleon, and in fact, some of the old books are just called chameleons, and then it's got a big picture of anoles on the front. Because that is a common. So it's hard to be like I'd like to be very grumpy and disgruntled about it, but in reality, that is kind of it has historical precedent, and it was just because they hadn't seen a real chameleon in many cases. They didn't know what a real chameleon was, and then they had these color changing lizards, and that was
and it happens. It's the same throughout the Americas. So I will talk about that in a few. So yes. My cat is very adamant about this subject. So among lizards, only iguanian lineages, because remember that chameleons, agamids, and what used to be called iguanids, which are now a bunch of different families, they are all in the same group, which I'll call iguanians. And among lizards, only other iguanians achieve some real similarities to chameleons. There are other groups like geckos that I will talk about later, that have some similarities or have been named have common names that allude to their similarity to chameleons, but they are not that similar. So for me, the two more chameleon-like representatives are polycrotids, which are a small family of neotropical lizards.
Sisters to the anoles?
No. They used to be. The anoles are sisters to corytophanids, which are basilisks and stuff like that. That's how, because anoles used to be within polycrotids. Yeah. But they got separated a few years ago because they discovered that anoles are actually, in fact, more closely related to corytophanids than they are to polycrotids.
Crazy.
And the other group that is similar to chameleons are anolids. So many of the species are known, like we said, as chameleons in their native range, like the North American green anole, Anolis carolinensis from the US and Western Cuba. Yes, their carolinensis is now found in Western Cuba because
in Western Cuba.
Well, no. Some populations that used to be Anolis porcatus were found to be actually Anolis carolinensis a few years ago. But we're not going to dwell into that. So, and across Latin America, many species of Polychrus and some species of Anolis are known as chameleones, which is the Spanish word for chameleon. So it's a common word used for many species over there. So within Polycrotidae is a family with only one genus, which is Polychrus. And this family, like I said, used to include Anolis, but they were recently it was found that Anolis are more closely related to corytophanids, which are basilisks and helmeted basilisks. And polycrotids are distributed throughout Central and South America, from Honduras and Nicaragua to Paraguay and Argentina, so the entire neotropics. They are absent, however, from the West Indies, and they're only found in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. So there are at least 8 species of polycrotids, but some of those are likely, including are polytypic species that include more than one taxon, and will probably be separated into multiple species in the coming years. So their similarities with chameleons are they have cone-shaped eyes with partially fused eyelids, more than what you see in Anolis. Anolis also have a little bit of partially fused eyelids, but polycrotids really have partially fused eyelids, so they only have like a tiny circle, but you can see the exposed. Aperture, and the eyes are also turret or cone-shaped to a degree. Not to the degree that chameleons do, but to a degree. They also have, the body is laterally compressed, and they can have they can or cannot have a vertebral serrated crest. Their digits are long and with very strong claws. And unlike anoles, they don't have expanded toe pads, so they don't have subdigital expanded lamellae. But in at least some species, and I couldn't figure out if this was in all species, but I know for a fact that in at least some species, they have grasping hands. So the two inner digits of the manus bend inwards, and the three external digits bend outwards. So they're able to grasp branches when they are moving around. And they also are, they're not super slow, but they're slow on the slower side for a lizard, because we are thinking about animals that are very fast going, very fast moving, but polychrotes tend to be slower. They tend to move in deliberate motions, and they are completely arboreal, and they have unlike chameleon, they have a very, very long tail, which is sometimes 3 or more times the body's length. But the tail, like chameleons, is prehensile. So with that tail, they grasp branches, which is what they are normally called in English monkey tail or monkey tail lizards. They are canopy dwellers. They also are capable of strong changes in coloration. They have slow cryptic movements like chameleons. But unlike chameleons, and I don't know, Mark, you might, remind me, some chameleons eat plant material, but a lot of polychrotids eat like large amount of plant material. So it's not uncommon to see them eating flowers and stuff like that.
It's super rare in chameleons. There are some that will occasionally munch on things, and people, especially people who keep chameleons, get a lot of experience with that. But it's not common most chameleons are true carnivores. They do not eat any plant material.
Yeah, that's the difference with polychrotids, because a lot of polychrotids will eat plant materials, and also I have observed them many, many, many times eating flowers. So it's not uncommon. So that's the difference with chameleons. But I would say that from all the lookalikes, polychrotids are one of the ones that most similar resemble chameleons in many aspects. So the other chameleon lookalikes are in the family Anolidae, which of course is anoles. And among anoles, which are more than 434 species right now, which somehow are included in one genus. Yes, which somehow I was about to say, which somehow are included into one genus, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
There are several species within anoles that are chameleon-like. Many of these species used to be included in different genera within anoles. Like, for example, the famous Chamaeleolis, which is called Chamaeleolis because of their similarity with chameleons, which are from the Greater Antilles, and they are very large anoles that are what they call the twig giant. Twig giants, the twig giants, and they live in the Greater Antilles. They look very much like they have. A lot of these anoles that look like chameleons actually have a lot of a casque, not like chameleon, but a similar casque. They have occipital crests and ridges and bumps and stuff that make them look like they have a helmet.
Yeah, significant parietal expansions as well, or at least a fortified parietal bridge. Yeah.
Yep, they also tend to have more turret-like eyes than other anoles, and their tail is relatively short and strongly prehensile in all these anoles. So, like Chamaeleolis, you also have other groups like another group of anoles that used to be separated in a different genus called Phenacosaurus, which is found in the mountains of South America, that are similar to Chamaeleolis in that they have. My cat is going for it today. So,
is Chamaeleolis the Cuban false?
Yes, the Cuban false chameleon.
Yeah. Okay.
But in reality, they and if you look if you search for a picture of Phenacosaurus, you would see that it's kind of similar. All those genera are not valid. because even if you would to split Anolis into different genera, Chamaeleolis will fall into a genus that is called Cyphosaurus, which include other great Antillean species, and Phenacosaurus would fall within. Phenacosaurus is even if you separate Anolis, is not is polyphyletic. So you would have it's polytypic. Sorry, you will have some falling. All of them fall within Dactyloa, which includes all continental alpha Anolis. So apart from this plethora of various lineages of Anolis that evolved, there are several other lineages of Anolis that evolved small, slender forms with long bodies, relatively short limbs, which are also deliberate in slow movement and cryptic habits, and also have short, strongly prehensile tails. And these are the Twiganoles. And the Twiganoles come in different lineages. There are Twiganoles in the Caribbean, there are Twiganoles in the Antilles, and they are all rather chameleon-like. They look a lot like some of those chameleons that Mark showed, that I think is the Kaluma, that live in they tend to look a lot like that.
They do.
The tails of many of these arboreal species are strongly prehensile. So that's one of those things that I don't think you tend to see the same curling thing that the chameleons do as strongly, but they definitely will grasp branches and stuff like that with their tail, and sometimes even suspend themselves.
And in fact, I believe the vertical curl, so the chameleon tails curl vertically inward, downward. So that's really important. For instance, a big hint to the people at Disney and Pixar who are listening right now, who keep illustrating the chameleon tail to go the wrong way because it's easier for them to walk on a flat surface. So anybody who's watched Tangled, for instance, should be aware that the chameleon's tail bends the wrong way because it's actually a curly-tailed lizard and not a real chameleon.
You can also tell it's not real because it's not trying to bite her constantly.
Yes, that is true. Although it does shoot somebody in I believe, the eye socket with its tongue, which would be quite painful. But it's, as far as I know, is a totally unique adaptation to chameleons. I don't know of any other lizards that have a vertically rotating tail. So
I think so.
There are various arboreal monitor lizards that have laterally curling tails. There are the curly-tailed lizards, which have the tail that goes. Sorry, what's the genus of curly-tailed lizards?
Laeocephalus,
which have the tail that goes upwards. There's also some agamids that have a tail that goes upwards, and
Chihua gecko, Minara gecko.
Yes,
Chihua
exactly. So various geckos, also the Ailurus scalabotes have the tail that curls to the side, etc. But there's nothing really that curls downward. So that's kind of a unique thing. And chameleons actually, not only does the tail curl downward, but they've actually got like rough surfaces bordering on the lamellar surfaces for actual grip. And also chameleon palms have true like lamellae style sticking surfaces on the bottom of the hand. So they have strong claws, they have really, really strong grip, and then they also have kind of an adhesive surface on the bottom of their feet. So like the ultimate climbing mittens.
So I was going to say that unlike chameleons, all except one rather un-chameleon-like ground-dwelling Anolis species, all Anolis have smooth, like an expanded, smooth
digital
lamellae that are not unlike those on geckos. So the only other group that have some similarities to chameleons are agamids, which are another iguanian group.
Right.
And I think from those, the two that I would consider, several arboreal agamid lizards, particularly those in the subfamily Draconinae, are somewhat chameleon-like, unless to a lesser degree than what I would see in Polycrotis and Anolids. So there are two species of Pygmiagamas in the genus Cophotis, which, by the way, like chameleons, don't have external ear openings. And they are from Sri Lanka, and they look a lot like Twiganoles, actually, and they resemble chameleons, and they also have a prehensile tail.
They have gigantic scales.
They have gigantic scales.
Probably the second largest scales of all reptiles after Geckolepus.
Yeah, the same thing with the genus Pseudocophotis, which also includes 2 species from Southeast Asia, in Indonesia and Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then there are 6 species in the genus Harpesaurus from Indonesia, from Sumatra and Borneo, which also have prehensile tail, but the tail is longer, and I think it curls in upwards sometimes in this genus. So I'm not sure. They also have
totally upwards.
Yeah, they also have horn-like or leaf-like protrusions in their.
That's one of the things that I absolutely love about agamids. So agamids and chameleons are a really cool group to study for ornaments, because agamids and chameleons have done the same ornaments, multiple independent times. And for instance, having a big projection off the nose.
Because I was about to say that in analogues, projections tend to be different because they tend to be leaf-like, which is not what you see in agamids. They tend to be more horn-like or bump-like or stuff like that. Yeah. So other several draconine agamids in the genus Ceratophora or Gonocephalus or Calotes vaguely resemble chameleons.
I would put out that there are Ceratophora aspera is a really similar chameleon to really similar to the leaf chameleons. In terms of their overall structure, their overall anatomy, but ecologically very different. They are much faster. They are much less timid animals. But they use exactly the same they kind of occupy a similar niche in the overall space. So I think they're really good.
As far as I could find, I couldn't find any agamids. As far as I could see, I couldn't find any agamids that would do the thing with the fingers to grasp
I'm also not aware of it.
Yeah.
I do think that you sometimes see that in Varanids that are climbing, but Varanids couldn't be further from a chameleon if they tried. Yes. There's so much. I do think that the chameleons have a relatively high level of intelligence, quote unquote, whatever that really means in SquaMates. We will promise have a future episode on cognition, but we'll have to bring in an external expert because we're not the right people to talk about it. But in any case, I do think that there is kind of that level of intelligence in chameleons, but I think in terms of their overall ecology, physiology, hunting methods, etc., the Varanids are just so fundamentally different from chameleons. It doesn't really bear any more than they live in trees kind of comparison level, because that's basically
which at that point you might as well name any kind of group of lizards.
Exactly.
So the only thing I would say is that the only other group of lizards is the 4 species of Iridactylotes, which is geckos, which are from New Caledonia, and they're commonly called chameleon geckos because they have strong, distinctly prehensile tails. But for me, that's where all the similarities end, because in all other aspects, they're extremely gecko-like. Their appearance is very much gecko-like. So
they move slowly. They're I think the twig and null comparison is a little bit stronger than to
even among New Caledonian geckos. I feel like chahuas are more chameleon-like than chameleon geckos.
But then chahuas are nocturnal, so you kind of lose that, and they the vision is so different. There's so many different things that are really missing from those. So, now I agree with your assessment that Polychorus are probably the closest, ecologically overall, and then of course Chamaeleolus. In the general sense, Chamaeleolus are, at least those are the ones that come closest. But nothing is really even in every case. It's just so far from the optimization. So I think that if I were to look at it from a what kind of other repetition events do we see within SquaMate evolution? They remind me a lot of snakes. We see things that are like snakes in many different groups, but we don't see anything that is quite as
that has taken it to that extreme.
Exactly. They're all chameleons
gelled together with all those things.
Snakes are extra in so many different ways, and chameleons in the same way are extra. They have gone that extra bit to go into a new evolutionary it's just a totally different a place in the evolutionary optimum spectrum, that they are on their own and doing their own thing. If you were to fast forward by 50 million years, it wouldn't surprise me if the chameleons of today are the founders of an entire, what we might then call another order of reptiles, while the snakes have done another order of reptiles. And who knows which other SquaMates would kind of found that kind of group. But I think that they're just so distinct that it would be quite quick that we would get to that level of like totally unique adaptation. They're in their own optimum. They're kind of now bouncing around this new space in the same way that snakes are bouncing around their own new space as well.
Varanids give us mosasaurs again.
That would be ideal.
But that's not. But that we cannot be perpetuating that myth, because varanids are not most closely related to.
No, they're not most closely, but they are ecologically the most similar today.
I was going to say. I mean, I just watching them swim and stuff.
I just want to say again that an iguana might be more closely related to a
mosasaur.
A mosasaur.
I don't know that I knew that. How cool.
Yeah. Because they are equally related to toxicophagy.
While we're talking about some extinct beasts,
yes,
let's have the last 2 minutes. Can you talk about trypanosaurs? Because we haven't talked about them. And they're like, when they're illustrated, they are the ones where, like, so often they're compared.
No, it's because they have some, or we believe they have some arboreal adaptations, but that's where all the similarities are. These are very different animals that in some ways might have something more in common with like arboreal and eaters, but they are very different. First of all,
they are illustrated as having a vertically curling tail, which would be.
But the tail is not vertically curling. It's like it's vertically locked. It's basically that thing doesn't curl. It's like lock, and it curls to a degree, but it wouldn't be able to do what chameleons do.
It's functioning more like
and
a,
it's
like
very
a hook.
inflexible, actually, and it's basically like a hook. So for me, what it indicates is that it was hooking them to something that we know. The most similarities that I see are in the manus of some genus like Vallesaurus, which has the same thing where there are 3 digits on one side, 2 digits to one side, and it's actually quite strong. The same in Megalonchosaurus has also that. But then some genera that are more derived, like Trypanosaurus itself, has those crazy, something that we have no modern.
That's interesting that you brought up like tamanduas, because that's where I went with it.
And it's probably something used to dig. There are some species of Trypanosaurs that have been hypothesized to be burrowers. We don't know.
It's a proto-therizinosaur.
And they also, as far as we know, they have very bird-like skulls. So they even have a beak, and so it's a completely different a beak-like thing. So it's a very different animal. I think there has been a misrepresentation of them as chameleon in some art, but because they're arboreal, they have some basic arboreal adaptations. But that's where all the similarities end.
Super interesting.
And I'm going to say something that I probably shouldn't say, but they're about to change even more soon. So stay tuned.
Oh, how exciting. Good. Well, I think that has been, what a marathon. We've done it all. We've done all of the ecology. Nobody could ever need any more information. But if I release this on schedule, which I hope to achieve, then today is World Chameleon Day. Go find out what else is happening on all of the socials and look us up while you're at it. You can follow you can follow me at Mark Scherz, MarkScherz, all over the social medias. Ethan, where can one find you on the social medias?
You know what? The easiest place is just go to my website. It's ethankosak.com.
Excellent. And Gabriel Lugetto, where can one find you?
I'm at Serpent Illus in all social media, and my website is gabriellugetto.com.
Fantastic. And you can follow the podcast at SquaMates Pod on all of the social media except for the ones that are run by the right wing. You can follow us on YouTube or watch us on YouTube and get insights into the objects of the collection here at the Natural History Museum in Denmark. And you can send us questions on social media as well as SquaMatespod at gmail.com. squamates.com. Please leave a review over at Apple Podcasts if you want to, but share also the podcast with your friends and family if you like it and think that they will too. We appreciate everything that you do to share our voices into other people's ear holes. And with that, we'll wrap up as we always do, saying, Hakuna
Squamata.